Hello. In this series of talks, we've discussed at some length the nature of a proposal and the mechanisms and processes of funding research and also getting it into print. But now let's look a little more systematically at research outcomes. In other words, at the end products of research. And indeed, in the proposal, it's probably quite necessary to specify what the end products are going to be. Perhaps not in excruciating detail, because there will be changes during the duration of the project, but they won't probably be fundamental changes, and therefore some degree of specification is needed even at the proposal stage. So there will be a question at the end of it: was the project worthwhile? Did it have valuable and valid outcomes? And has it changed the world for the better? Perhaps only very, very modestly, but in fact, has it had a positive outcome to it where things are better than they were? For example, I participated in a project called Pro Capita's Protected Capital Cities, which got together 24 capital city emergency services from capitals around Europe, and we met frequently at the emergency services headquarters in Rome. And what was the outcome of that? Well, apart from publications and apart from interchange, in fact, it created a network which proved to be quite durable, where the emergency services and offices of the different cities were talking to each other about common aims and common problems and exchanging information, which led to improvements in what they do. So things had changed for the better as a result of Pro Capita's, the project. So what would a funded research project produce? In the first instance, it would produce publications, which would primarily be papers in refereed journals, which would be a good, kosher way of showing that the project had come to conclusion with results, and the results are worthwhile. There might be a website, and it might last longer than the project did, with information on it, also access to publications such as, for example, working papers and reports and so on, and the ability, therefore, to engage in discussion with the project participants and enjoy the fruits of the research. Some projects involve technological advances where there is software or equipment or advances in design that come out of the project and that can then be implemented, possibly commercially, and sold, or at least utilised by those who need them. Changes in the way things are done. Projects can perhaps result in better emergency planning or better emergency response. And the innovation then may diffuse among the stakeholders who have access to the knowledge and can implement the changes and are convinced that they are improvements. Better policies among decision makers, governments at various levels, and so on. Public awareness of issues, where the project has included components that involve the public and try to improve the sense of awareness, particularly of things like hazards and risks. And improved awareness among the decision makers and practitioners, the professional people who have to deal with disasters, hazards, risks, crises, emergencies, the aftermath, forewarning, and all the other aspects that are part of disaster risk reduction. And there may be activities such as workshops which are designed to disseminate all of this information to potential users. If we take an example, which is that of a project that ran from 2008 until 2011 and was called MOVE, at least that was the acronym for it, and it meant Improvement of Methods for Vulnerability Assessment in Europe. So MOVE produced vulnerability assessment methods by catalogue and also by application in the field to sites in mountainous areas, hilly areas, plains, coasts, metropolitan areas, large cities and rural areas around Europe. So having done that, then there was a theoretical side to MOVE, and that produced a methodology which came out in a book and in a widely read paper and has been used in a variety of places, including somewhere like Japan. So the methodology was widely disseminated. There was a manual of vulnerability assessment methods, so the project had collected a series of methods and improved some of them and applied them to see how far they work, and it would put it all together in a manual. The sister document to that was a set of case histories where the applications in the hills, the mountains, the coasts and so on were put together. So both of those were available for download on the website of MOVE, and they could be downloaded by anyone who might get benefit from using them. We also wrote and published a book which contained summaries of the case histories, and the first chapter, it was the methodology, the last chapter, a conclusion on what all of this has as a wider meaning. 23 scientific papers were written and published out of MOVE, 19 internal reports which represented the deliverables, which were evaluated to show that the work had had success, that it had come to the conclusion as it should have done according to the proposal and declaration of work. There were 3 workshops for stakeholders, one in Turkey, one in Germany and one in Poland. There were 59 other activities of disseminations, including conference presentations at more plenary conferences, poster presentations, lectures here and there, and so on. So that was MOVE. This was the first page of its website, and from that page I think one could still download the projects of MOVE. This was the book, Assessment of Vulnerability to Natural Hazards, and that is still in print with the publisher Elsevier. And this was the manual, how to assess vulnerability, one of the deliverables, but also freely available to the public, and so on. One problem with such projects, or indeed any project, is that once the project is over, how durable are the products that it has produced? Websites sometimes fall vacant, they're not maintained. For example, there was an interesting Interreg project on how to write emergency plans at the local level. It had a good website with some interesting dissemination on it of useful material, and eventually the website simply fell vacant and it no longer exists. The information is lost. Software, of course, can be made redundant by the development of new software or changes in platform, meaning that it can no longer run. Research papers are superseded by new research. On the other hand, you could argue that many good research papers are simply the foundation of further research that is done in the future. And meetings and workshops and so on are forgotten. Well, so be it. This was the website of Procapites, or rather, no, it wasn't. This was simply a mention of it on the European Commission website, but Procapites itself has completely lost its website. And therefore the fruits of it are, well, they probably still exist in the connections between the emergency services that the project engendered, but little more than that. Now, some things, though, to look more positively at it, do last. For example, a paper can become a classic in its field. A book, likewise, could become widely cited and used for decades afterwards if it really is good. Relationships that are struck up between project participants can continue. That includes between individuals in the project or groups of researchers, or between institutions themselves. Networks, therefore, can be durable beyond the life of a single project. And certain forms of knowledge acquired during the project can also be durable. They can be handed down by different means. Training and experience acquired during the project will continue to enrich the lives of those who receive the training and experience, and so on. So, projects and indeed proposals often require pathways to impact, and it is useful to be explicit at the outset as to how the research can be used in the future. So in a proposal and in the eventual project, what is going to be useful about it and how will it change the world for the better? How is it a good investment of time, money and other resources? Pathways to impact. Impact has many forms. So in fact, there is no accurate specification of what exactly is a pathway to impact. Impact can be very specific or it can be rather more general, but impact there needs to be. There is a problem with research that has been hollowed out by excessive emphasis on impact, so that in point of fact we're not really pushing forward the frontiers of knowledge at all. What we're doing instead is merely to create products that have immediate impact but not on the basis of improved research. And that is one of the problems of current European funded research. We end up therefore with a risk of an inspiration gap, in disaster research at least. We have copious publication rates. When I started as a disasterologist, there were few journals and there was very little published on disasters as phenomena. Hazards a bit better, but disasters very little. Now there is a vast amount. There are about 85 journals dedicated to disasters and more than 500 that routinely publish papers on disasters. Vast amounts of work is being done, vast amounts of publications are coming out. But is there an inspiration gap? Does this actually amount to a huge surge in creativity? Is it sometimes precocious publication that takes place before the work is ready, mature enough, really and truly, to be published? Does the new research adequately build on the old? One of the problems we have in this field is we haven't adequately defined a curriculum of things that you ought to have read in order to be a disasterologist. And perhaps we should have done that, because there are classic works, papers and books and treatises from the past, even from long ago, that are still very essential reading. And we get shingling, which involves, for example, well, here's an example of it. Different journals, but essentially the same paper in slightly different forms. Now, it's not outright plagiarism. These are different works. They've been written separately, but they all basically say the same thing. There are small differences in the way that this is written and put, but it does essentially represent 3 attempts to publish what is fundamentally the same thing. So we might end up with something of a gap between quality and quantity, and this is what I call the inspiration gap. Participation in this field in terms of research and publication has gone up enormously, but has the quality kept pace, or has it reduced over time? We certainly don't find that every second paper is a gem that involves tremendously new ideas. And also we have more and more people participating who perhaps don't have the full training and the full expertise in what is disaster research. Another issue regards technology. Is it the solution to the problem, or is it not? Does it, in fact, in the ceaseless production of technology, result in a technological dependency that actually creates risk and vulnerability rather than abolishing it? So technology certainly has its place. We can't do without it. It's vitally important. But we have to be careful that we're not doing research to improve technology or to demonstrate that technology is the ultimate solution when it's not. Many problems that technology is being applied to are human problems, and the technology may or may not make them worse. So what we want, in fact, is research that doesn't make them worse. One or two things you could look at for a greater discussion of this kind of thing. My blog, for example, where there are a number of essays on this sort of topic. For example, currently in disaster research, there is a tremendous emphasis on optimization routines. These are algorithms that people who are expert in making algorithms in operations research and mathematics and so on produce, and then they are applied apparently, ostensibly, to practical problems. And this is extremely fashionable in disaster research. The reality of it is that almost none of these algorithms will actually be used for anything, and if they were, they could prove downright dangerous because they are detached from reality. They're not made with the end user in mind. And indeed, many end users, namely the people who work on the front line in disasters, wouldn't dream of using algorithms of this kind. And many of them wouldn't work anyway. So who gets to know about research and what channels can be used to publicise it. Sometimes it is as important to publicise the research as it is to write it in order to ensure that your research gets used. And that is a challenge that's well worth confronting and doing something about with the usual human ingenuity.